speak to you in the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer of all life. Amen. So I wanted to start out this evening by sharing part of somebody else's sermon, because that's always good. There's a pastor from the U.S., from a big megachurch, and he has a really interesting reflection on part of our reading tonight. And it's one that, as soon as I heard it, stuck with me, and I've come to really like telling the story. So this pastor, Rob Bell, likes to tell the story that Jesus, having done all of the right things in Jewish culture to become a rabbi, has just come to that point where he's at the start of creating his own ministry. And for him to become a fully fledged rabbi, he would need to have his own followers. And to get to that point, growing up, he would have had to have gone to Jewish school. He would have had to have proved himself to be good enough that he could have kept going to school. Because if you weren't, then you would fail out and you would be sent home and to continue the family business. The practice would have been to collect the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the smartest people to become your disciples. And then you would eventually end up becoming the rabbi at a synagogue, and hopefully maybe become one of the rabbis of great fame and renown. So here at the start of Jesus' ministry, he does something different, because he starts picking James and John and Peter. He picks them, and they're fishermen. So one of the reflections is that they're the ones who failed out of the school. They're the ones who didn't make it. So they're not the cream of the crop. Now, thanks to some reflections that we had at a staff meeting, it was also pointed out that perhaps Peter and his brother were on the lower end of the fisherman's wealth spectrum, because it says that they were just throwing their nets into the sea, which is a bona fide way of fishing. You throw your net into the sea and you pull it back and find out whatever's in your net. But then James and John were with their father, and they were in a boat, and they had hired hands. So maybe they were at the other end of the spectrum of fisherman's wealth. This is pure speculation. But as Jesus is walking along, he calls Peter, and then he calls James and John, and they all leave what they're doing and they come and follow him. Part of the reflection for us is to think about what it means to leave behind what was and move forward to what could be. It's a risk. We're faced with that risk with any choice that we make, anything that we do every moment of every day. Going into the unknown is always a risk. Perhaps because the variety of life is such that we have no other options. We're at that place where the only place left to go is forward, because to stay in that place would be death. That could relate to somebody who's a refugee. That could relate to somebody who is homeless. That could relate to a whole variety of different situations and circumstances. The harder situation for us, make a broad sweeping generalization, but most of middle class, most of people with options would find themselves more like somebody who shows up a little bit later in Jesus' ministry, the rich young man. It says that he's ready to follow Jesus. And Jesus says, great, sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and come and follow me. And then it says that that man went away sad because he knew he couldn't do it. With those two ends of the spectrum, we find ourselves in the church. The church which holds both of those in tension. It holds those who have nothing left to lose, and so are willing to follow, because no matter what, it would be a better place. And it holds in tension those who have failed and who've gone home, like Peter and his brother, and like James and his brother. Those who could have the option of staying where they are. We're reminded that we're always called. And it doesn't matter at what age or what stage. Sometimes it doesn't matter how long it takes. But we're called to move from where we are to a place that is life-giving. We're called to move from wherever we are to help give life to others. Remember that in this story, Jesus was at the very beginning of his ministry. And there's a strange turn of phrase in there. It says that he made his home in Capernaum. It wasn't his home for very long. He wasn't there because he started moving. He started moving, going where he was called. And his life didn't last that much longer as a human. And we hold that Jesus was both fully God and fully human. And in that fully human part, Jesus was walking along the Sea of Galilee. Again, more speculation, but perhaps trying to figure out what was next. I mean, he'd been baptized by his cousin. He'd had this call. And yet, he needed to do something else. He needed to do more. He also knew that he couldn't do it alone. So he started building a community, and from there, we know the larger rest of the narrative in the story. But this starting point, this point of vulnerability, this point of uncertainty at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and yet a way seems to very quickly present itself. Whether it's for the fishermen in their boats, whether it was for Jesus and all of his humanity, or whether it's for the church. We look for the wisdom in the stories that give us community, that give us movement, and not movement by ourselves, but movement together. That idea of strength in numbers, and that sense of call. Those are the three things that carry us and pull us and draw us. So as we are at the beginning of 2017, we're trying to figure out what this year holds. I've heard a lot of people say that they hope that this year is better than the last. I've heard a lot of people say that they hope that this year holds a lot more promise. So we go into this year together. We go into this year from the various places where we're at. We go with faith, trusting that God will lead us to a place where there is life. Amen.